Okay, confirming you guys can see my screen. Okay, depending on how we go, we might take a short break, like in the middle. Um, I'll check in with us like maybe halfway through, okay? Um, okay, here we are. How to read well. Obviously, you are here, you all know how to read. And I think this question of, well, what does that mean? I find in my own reading practice, I'm a very fast reader, and that has served me very well in many contexts. But often when I'm reading a novel, I close the last page, and a day later, I can't really remember what it was that I read. I don't really remember the protagonist's name. I don't really remember sort of the plot, and I'm certainly not really appreciating like the details or the artistry. Or things like that. And so this class is really a manifestation of my own effort to say, reading is so important to me. I love books. And yet I have this whole list of books I've read that I don't even really remember. How can I think about developing a practice that helps me remember the books that I'm reading? And this class too is also really like a love letter to what it means to be someone who is moved by books and feels value in having these questions, right? And sitting here on a Saturday afternoon on a beautiful day to think about reading. Okay, so the first rule that I want to share with you in reading well is to write in your books. So this is something that I feel so strongly about. And this masterclass is kind of like a masterclass on how to just scribble thoughtfully in your books. So when I taught this class maybe 6 months ago or something, people felt like viscerally opposed to writing in their books. And it's interesting that there are a lot of opinions. Some people feel like they should never write in books, they can't do it. They have journals along the side that they write, or they take notes and put them in the book. There are all sorts of ways to kind of do that, like how people want to take notes or do take notes. And we can talk about that, or we can discuss it via email after. But I feel very strongly that when you read, you should have a pen in your hand and you should be noting, marking the page as you go. And this just is a completely different way of reading. It actually brings the body into it, right? You have this embodied experience as you're marking the page. And it can be a really wonderful gift to yourself when you revisit a book and you see notes that you don't remember writing. So I feel super strongly about this. For some people, I know it's like they can't bring themselves to do it, but I encourage you to start trying. Okay, so we have some objectives today. So let's kind of discuss what we're gonna do today. Why read? Why is reading a worthy pastime? There are obviously so many other things you could be doing. Number two, reading like a who are you? Like, who is it that is reading? Are you an artist? Are you a marketer? Are you a psychologist? Or, who is the you that is like, what is it that you bring to the table? We all have unique qualities, experiences, and identities that we can and should be bringing to a work of fiction. And number three, what actually is meaning? Um, we'll discuss this because it's an interesting topic. Four is really important to me, developing a lens. We want to really work on training the eye and really developing a critical filter through which you're reading a book. We want to start to see the scaffolding of a text so that you can really appreciate the architecture a bit better. Two kind of tools I use for this, as well as like narrative perspective, which we'll talk about, and then something that I love called affect theory. So we'll get into that. Five, developing taste. What actually is good taste? What is it to be well read? is it snobby or not? And what is the canon or the Western canon? What does that mean and why is that important? Number 6, literary alchemy. So we will look at some passages and we will make some magic with making meaning and kind of using everything that we talk about. And then lastly, source material. And this is kind of my working practice and how I'm kind of thinking about the ways that I'm engaging with the text while I'm reading, how I kind of journal and put together some prompts and answers after I've read. So we'll finish with that, okay? All right, so we're going to start from the beginning. Why read? I'm sure many of you have seen this quote, but a book must be the axe for the frozen sea inside of us. And I really love that. And I hope that all of you have had an experience with a book, especially fiction, that really does shake you or move you or just really is, a profound aesthetic experience. If you have not read a book like that, do email me or, raise your hand in the chat, and we can have some book recommendations. I just recently reread Song of Solomon by Toni Morrison for our book club a couple months ago, and like I was in tears at the end, and I was just, this is the best book I've ever read in my life. So those are the books that are worth reading, and you're lucky enough to stumble upon them every once in a while. Okay, so we're going to talk about C.S. Lewis. He was a British author and a university professor. We know him mostly from his Chronicles of Narnia. But he has a work entitled An Experiment in Criticism, and he seeks to answer a simple but significant question: how should we read? And this book is really just about the preparation for ourselves before we pick up a book. This quote, he's really encouraging, we'll talk about it, but he really is encouraging you to surrender before you read. And I agree with this to an extent, but I am also, as a reader, very critical, and I do require that a book convey and quickly prove its deservingness for my time and attention. And so I hope that as the course goes on and as you read, you will develop that discerning faculty in yourself where you are really saying, is this book worth my time? Is this a product of contemporary publishing marketing? Is there true artistry behind this text, right? And that's why I really enjoy reading books that aren't published today, because I enjoy books that have sort of stood the test of time and continue to shed light on culture and society. Unfortunately, I think a lot of books that are published today aren't really relevant in 5 years or aren't really remembered or around. And I think that we have such limited time, so I like to promote reading books that really have endured over time. Okay, so how to read well. So Lewis writes that we can find a book bad only by reading it as if it might, after all, be very good. We must empty our minds and lay ourselves open. There is no work in which holes can't be picked, no work that can succeed without a preliminary act of goodwill on the part of the reader. So his experiment is really proposing that the only way we as readers may fully appreciate literature is by laying aside our skepticism. You can wrestle with that. I think that a healthy skepticism is appropriate, right? He was writing in the 60s and there wasn't social media and there wasn't sort of the marketing machine of BookTok and Bookstagram and all of these things that were sort of like flashing in our faces. So I do think that this dynamic between skepticism and not is an interesting one and an important one that you can discern for yourselves as well. But Lewis, he does say, we are so busy doing things with the work that we give it too little chance to work on us. So thus, increasingly, we meet only ourselves. So we're starting to talk about this relationship between the book and ourselves and that meeting place. Number 2, by being receptive. He encourages us to yield to the tone, atmosphere, and attitude of the work. So we're going to talk a lot about atmosphere. I'm not sure that that's something that is really thought about or talked about a lot when we read, and I think it's incredibly important. Number 3, by reading with our ears. I love this. Every piece of literature is a sequence of words and sounds. The true reader doesn't really read with his eyes or her eyes, but must likewise also read with her ears. We must absorb the rhythm and the cadence of the words and phrases that form every literary work. So I find this to be one of the reasons I struggle with contemporary literature is just this reason, sort of the sound of the words, the way that sentences feel very repetitive, their length and sort of the way that they sound. And if you read like a Fitzgerald or works published further at the earlier of the 19th century or something, you'll see that there's such variation. There's this really melodic tone to the way that sentences sound, the use of commas and semicolons and em dashes, right? There's just so much going on within a sentence that's not really happening, I feel, in contemporary literature. At least in, not all contemporary literature, but the sonority of text, of sentences, if you read them out loud, aren't as interesting perhaps as other books. Yes, Jennifer. Oh, did you have something to say?
Me.
Oh, sorry. I thought I heard something and I saw you were like,
I'm
it-
sorry, I need to turn off my audio. I
oh, that's
apologize.
okay. That's okay. No problem. No problem at all. And we'll kind of talk about free and direct discourse in regard to this as well. This goes back to narrative, and how free and direct discourse and kind of like even when we're reading to ourselves, we're kind of using our faculty of our ears, or like how things sound. So it really integrates with our eyes, with our intellect, and with our ears. Number 5, by looking beyond events. Lewis does use this term, the unliterary reader, which I think is a little bit funny. But he says the unliterary reader focuses his attention exclusively upon the ideas and proceedings found in the story itself, ignoring aspects of the book that flow beyond mere plot, right? So I'm guilty of wanting to read for plot or just sort of getting swept up in the plot. And I think what makes a literary reader or a literary fiction as well is that we're thinking about things beyond just plot beyond just but what the hero did and their challenge and what happens. We're much more interested in the subjective changes and the interiority of the characters. Okay, and lastly, by surrendering ourselves. The act of immersing ourselves in a book is one of the few actions in this world that allows us to perceive the world as it is viewed by another. And this is the key to this is surrender. Okay. My own eyes are not enough for me. I will see through those of others. Okay, so we're kind of midway kind of through this like theoretical context. I hope you guys are staying with me. It is really interesting. This is Harold Bloom. He was a literary critic at Yale, and he is perhaps one of the most prolific readers of all time. And he is a staunch advocate of the Western canon. He has some dissenters, but he is very well read and very his passion for literature is like it's just really beautiful. He's criticized because the Western canon is very white, and I think there's like one or two women included, so it is problematic in that regard. But this book, How to Read and Why, really talks about the value of these texts and what they have to offer. And I love what he says here. He says, we read deeply for varied reasons, most of them familiar, that we cannot know enough people profoundly enough, that we need to know ourselves better, that we require knowledge, not just of self and others, but of the way things are. Okay. Here are some of the reasons why reading is valuable. And he goes into this in the book as well. It's really, reading is, of course, a pathway to self-discovery. It's essential for intellectual stimulation and development. It's a source of immense aesthetic pleasure, and we'll get into this as well. Harold Bloom really just talks about the beauty and artistry of well-crafted prose and poetry. For him, I think that truly was like his life joy. He just dedicated himself to reading and rereading and criticizing literature. It's also important for understanding cultural and historic contexts. It also provides some resistance to simplification and oversimplified thinking. Bloom encouraged solitude and reflection and found reading to be a great excuse and a space for introspection. And yeah, Bloom did see literature as a source of spiritual and moral insight. But I think the one that we will really focus on is aesthetic pleasure. This is so exciting to me. And I think what I love about books and recommendations too, right? Like when a friend recommends a good book or says, oh my gosh, you're going to love this, right? There's something visceral about that. There's an anticipation, there's an excitement, right? That is a spark that is so exciting and so valuable and so like such a gift, so beautiful about the human experience. And that's what I feel like reading, really should be. There's this interesting article about aesthetic pleasure, if anyone wants to like go down a rabbit hole. But when we encounter something beautiful, we do have a particular kind of experience. And it could be like visual appeal or emotional resonance or intellectual stimulation, or even a sense of harmony and balance. It really, like, aesthetic pleasure refers to the enjoyment or satisfaction we derive from these experiences of beauty, which is an interesting framework for thinking about it. And I think that the pleasure that we get from reading is multifaceted. So it's not just beautiful prose, like sensory delight or emotional fulfillment, but it's also like contemplative pleasure, right? Like, what does that mean to you in your reading practice? Like, what is contemplative pleasure? And in what ways do you prioritize it or not? And in what ways do you, are you accountable to that in your life or not? it's interesting, like while some experiences of beauty are subjective, right? What I find beautiful, you may not. The link between beauty and aesthetic pleasure suggests a universal aspect of human experience. My friend studied anthropology, and he wrote a paper on how on a on a society, an indigenous community that from long ago, that they would sharpen their stones to the point of transparency, and not for the purpose of using them as tools or as weapons, but as because they were beautiful objects. And I think too, aesthetic judgment is a really important faculty to develop, right? Because when we judge something as beautiful, we are making a statement about the pleasure it provides us. So our judgments about beauty are deeply personal, and they're really tied to our individual experiences of pleasure. Okay. So Roland Barthes, The Pleasure of the Text, a really important book. And this talks about how and why readers derive pleasure from texts. There's pleasure and bliss, which he talks about. Pleasure as the comfort and satisfaction a reader experiences when engaging with a familiar, coherent, and well-structured text. This comes from recognizing and appreciating the text's order, beauty, or adherence to literary norms. But bliss is more intense. It's a disruptive experience that really transcends pleasure, and it's kind of an ecstatic joy or profound disturbance. Now, I hope you guys are reading and experiencing profound joy or disruptive or, profound disturbances. Again, like please share books that have done that for you. But you can see the way that like these thinkers are engaging with books and really thinking about what is the experience that we get from reading, and why is this important? So the role of the reader. The active role is essential in creating meaning. So pleasure and bliss of a text, they're not inherent qualities. They are produced through the reader's interaction with the text. Each reader, we all bring our own experiences to the book. Emotions are interpretations, and this is what makes the experience unique and personal. Okay, intertextuality. This might be a new word for some of you, but it's a really interesting, beautiful, exciting concept. This is where texts refer to and draw upon other texts. The pleasure of reading often comes from recognizing these connections and understanding how a text fits into a broader literary and cultural context, right? So Hamlet, right? We know that so many stories are based on like retellings or re-renderings of Hamlet. We read Burg by Anne Quinn in our book club, which is a great book, challenging book. She's influenced by Virginia Woolf, but it is a retelling of Hamlet. So that is an example of intertextuality. And that is another part of the joy of reading, is that when you have read well and enough, especially these classic foundational texts, you start to see where they appear in other works. And that can be really exciting and really rewarding. And then lastly, the erotics of reading, which I feel like maybe I should retitle this course, The Erotics of Reading, or do another course specifically on this. But Barthes does use the metaphor of eroticism to describe the intimate and sensuous relationship between the reader and the text, which is interesting. I'm sure we don't think about it in that way in erotics. But the pleasure of this text, right? Pleasure, aesthetic pleasure, is akin to a seductive erotic experience where the reader is both captivated and transformed by the encounter. It's quite lovely. So, source material. Let's see, is there anything, oops. Is there anything in the chat? Oh, okay, good. I'm glad you're loving the theoretical context. Thank you. Sometimes I worry, like, are people nerding out on this the way that I nerd out on this? Um, okay, good. Thank you. I'm glad that this is resonating. Does anyone want to share a book recommendation that's coming to mind from them of like a book that's been meaningful, that's provided a profound disturbance or um, like much pleasure? We can do this at the end too, but I'm just curious. This is a good time, I think, for any questions or any like books that people just want to mention. Yeah, Jennifer, go ahead.
And in terms of like a profound, disturbing experience, this wasn't necessarily a good one, and it is a current book, so or a fairly current book, but it's A Little Life. Has anyone
Yes.
read
Yes.
that or heard of that?
Yes.
That book, talk about crying at the end, and I mean that just the characters and the way, you know, for me that was a really profoundly moving book.
Yeah. I have not read that one, but I have heard from so many people. I think that's a great book. People, I think, have a lot of opinions on it. Like people either, my experience is people either love that book or they don't like it. They feel really strongly either way. But I think certainly um, I've heard that it's incredibly moving.
And I think the writing was beautiful.
Yeah.
So I guess there was some aesthetic pleasure in just the beauty of the writing and, the story is engrossing, but it's just the insights into the different characters and into human nature, I thought was fantastic.
That's a great example. Thank you.
I have one if we want a
Please.
second. Well, Kathy Acker, Blood and Guts in High School.
Yes.
Yeah, I still claim it as like my absolute most favorite book, although like you, I'm like, I don't remember what happened in it. But when I read it, it blew my mind that like I'd never seen, I think, a woman write in a way that was just like so punk rock, so confrontational, but then also had that, intertextuality. She's plagiarizing the classics and
Mhm.
someone write in so many different formats to insist on fragmentation instead of like linear narrative. It felt like it kind of was the first thing that sort of showed me just like how broad the definition of what a book is could be.
Mm. I love that so much. I really love that. Thank you for sharing. I love Kathy Acker. Um, Also in the realm of intertextuality, Olivia Laing, who's a wonderful British writer, wrote a book, Crudo, which I can't quite recall, but it might be to Kathy Acker, or she might be writing in the voice of Kathy Acker. Um, it is, yeah, it's very much in conversation with Kathy Acker and her work. She might even be taking on the like writing as though she is Kathy Acker. And then Sarah also kind of raises a really important point. One that I find so fascinating is like, as she said, this was the first book. And I think that like when we think about our intellectual autobiographies and we think about the first works that really had an effect on us, if you are able to kind of go back and think about that, and it can even be children's books from when you were a child um, or when you were an adult, but kind of like trace your steps. And, so Sarah discovered Kathy Acker. Where did she go from there? Who did Kathy Acker introduce her to? And then where did that lead? And where did that lead? Right. And I think that trail is so fascinating to think about who you are and the type of reader you are, your interests and your passions. It's a really lovely exercise, and I just love that type of rabbit hole. One of the reasons I love the book Just Kids by Patti Smith so much is she's really talking about her influences with Rimbaud and the French poets. And there is just this like really fun soup of creatives in New York City at that time, but also the poets that she's learning from. And so that book, I think, besides just being a wonderful memoir, is also a really great text on thinking about what does it mean to be creative and to have a creative practice and a creative life.
I was you literally took the words out of my mouth because Just
Yeah.
Kids is going to be my book, and for that exact reason, I think it really, well, first, I have never felt like so transported to another time and place like I did while
Mm,
reading Just Kids. Um, and it really did make me think about what it means to be an artist and what it means to create and um, what it means to work hard and to like pursue things from a place that's not driven by, you know, financial success or materialistic like gains. It's really driven from a place of like deep being and deep like knowing yourself.
mm.
Um, and I just absolutely it sent me down a Patti Smith rabbit hole that I'm still deep in
Right.
because I was so moved by it all.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
Thank you guys for sharing. Thank you so much. Um, I I actually studied religious studies in high school, or sorry, in college. And I took this course that was cross-referenced. So it was a religious studies course, and it was cross-registered with the dance department. And we were like doing sort of interpretive dance, and kind of reading these theoretical works. So it was like a liberal arts, like, it was like very much a liberal arts course. And the music that we were reading or moving to was Horses by Patti Smith. And when I first encountered that album, I couldn't really get into it. I hadn't listened to music like that before. I thought it just didn't move me. And then I read the book, which was assigned for the course. And that was an entry point to the music, in which I fell in love with all of Patti Smith's songs, and Horses. That album is just one of my absolute favorites. Um, and so what you said reminded me just the way that books too can be a portal into like further aesthetic experience. It can be hard to appreciate some artworks, I think, when you don't have the context of an author or an author's life, or what the conversation, like if you don't have a way to enter into the conversation. So sometimes like being able to find those references can be really helpful too. Yeah, I'm due to reread Just Kids. It's been a while, but it's one of my favorites. Okay, anyone else before we move on? Okay. So take this off. The ultimate answer to the question, why read, is that only deep, constant reading fully establishes and augments an autonomous self. Until you become yourself, what benefit can you be to others? Okay, and that's a perfect segue to our second objective, which is discerning what type of reader you are, what type of person you are, or where your identities, your interests, your subjectivities, all of these things might inform your reading practice. So, what type of reader are you? These are questions to think about. Just as an aside, I have a book shopping addiction problem, and I think that when I buy books, I buy them because I think about, this is very personal, I guess, and it may not resonate or it may, but I buy books and I think about what type of person I will be after I've read them. Um, and I think that in some ways, when I was younger, right, I wanted to be a person who read Anna Karenina. I wanted to be the type of person who understood Hamlet, or knew, who like knew Shakespearean references and things like that. So there is this sense of becoming, right? It's who you are. Who are you bringing? Who's the self that you're bringing to the text? And who is this book? Like, who are you becoming, right? What type of conversations will you be able to have once you've read Anna Karenina, right? And you can meet someone who's read that book too. And that's a special moment, a special opportunity for connection. So these books here on the screen are some nice references that I've really enjoyed. And especially reading like a writer. You don't have to be a writer to enjoy that book, but she will teach you how to read with a scalpel, which I love. they really offer great introspection for how to kind of get under the hood and really see what's going on. So thinking about that scaffolding, right? So being a close reader means engaging deeply and meticulously with a text, right? Ideally with pen in hand, paying attention to its language, its structure and nuances to uncover layers of meaning that might not be immediately apparent. This process involves analyzing word choice, right? Why did this author choose that word instead of another one? Their syntax, right? Their rhythm, the imagery that they're creating, that's coming up in your mind, and rhetorical devices, as well as considering the broader context in which the text was written. So close reading really demands an active and thoughtful engagement. It's not sort of beach reading, although you can actively read at the beach. It's one where, close reading is really where readers not only really seek to understand what's being said, but how it's being conveyed and why it might be significant culturally, right? In the broader cultural context, what is this book saying and why is it important? And then how is it significant in my life? And what does it bring to my life? So, point of view. This is about which cat is telling the story and whether he is looking at the world from on top of a rock or under it. Voice is about what sort of cat he is. It's about word choice and word order, about dropped endings and distance from Her Majesty's English, perhaps. Voice is not the author. That's very important to remember. It's a device invented by the author. Voice is meaning. So what a narrator says and how he or she says it changes the story being told. Huckleberry Finn, right? What would the story be like if Huckleberry Finn weren't telling that story? Or Pride and Prejudice. I just did a class on Pride and Prejudice last month. And what would that story be without like the knowing, amused intelligence of the narrator, right? That narrator has a smirk throughout most of the story, right? What would it be like without that smirk? Subtext. So this is one of my favorite things. It's what's going on below the surface, between the lines, right? I love fragmented narrative, books that are written in fragments. And part of the reason is because in between those fragments, in the white space, in that moment where you're jumping from one paragraph to another, there is work being done there. There is so much in what is not said. There's as much sort of information, if you will, in that white space as there is in the paragraph of text itself. Right, so we know subtext is the underlying meaning or messages that aren't explicitly stated, but can be inferred from the context, characters' actions, dialogues, and symbolism within the narrative. And really, I think the true depth of story lies beneath the surface in these layers of implied meaning, right? Intended and not intended by the author. And this is really where you are going to look beyond the obvious plot and the obvious dialogue to uncover the themes, the motifs, the symbols that reveal deeper insights about the characters. There's this quote here that I love. Everything in a narrative is there to help tell the story, right? Everything, especially in short stories, you can really appreciate the way that like everything has a purpose. Sometimes that everything means a description of a place or the inclusion of a character that seems on the surface to be extraneous. But in the world of literary study, right, which I think if you're a good reader, you're in that world, we operate on the assumption that the seemingly extraneous is always meaningful and that there is no such thing as an unimportant detail. So you complete the book. Reader response theory. I love reader response theory. The subjectivity of reading, right? Your own subjectivity, your personhood is a central tenet of reader response theory. The meaning of a text does not exist in the book itself. The meaning comes between the interaction between the reader and the text, between you and the text. It's your relationship with the book. It's your interaction. It's that process. It's a verb. That's where meaning lies. Not, so yes, I might tell you, read this book. It's really, really good. But the meaning that you're going to come from that is not inherent. It's the way that you are interacting with this book. So Wolfgang Iser, I think, is the most prominent theorist about this concept. He says readers bring their own experiences, emotions, cultural backgrounds to their reading, which result in unique interpretations. This is why some people might love A Little Life and some people might hate A Little Life, right? It's their subjectivity that they're bringing to the book and working through that and then having an aesthetic response. So it really underscores this idea that literature is a living dialogue between the text and its audience, with each reading experience being distinct and transformative. So the person who, I was maybe 21 when I read Just Kids by Patti Smith, reading it now at 35, it's going to be a completely different conversation, a different experience for me based on who I've become in the interim. So we kind of already saw this when we were talking about Bart. So we really see how important it is to know that we are an active member in the creative process. I really want to impress that upon you. I've been guilty in the past of reading, especially Virginia Woolf, is kind of when I was really working on this in myself, but reading Virginia Woolf and just kind of waiting, okay, where's what everyone's talking about? I'm waiting for it to kind of jump off the page. But we're not a passive passenger on the plot ride. And I think such books, you might get to the point where you feel like they're kind of an insult to your intelligence, creativity, and kind of take away that opportunity for you to gain that aesthetic pleasure. So why does a book move me, right? We talked about that, the way that it can be a visceral experience. Affect theory is something that's very important to me. I find it to be really interesting. And it focuses on the nonverbal, bear with me, right? Nonverbal, pre-conscious, and often non-cognitive ways emotions and sensations shape human experience. So we often think about emotions as identifying feelings like sadness or joy. And affect really refers to a broader category. It's the flows of intensity, it's atmosphere, right? We're coming back to that word, and we'll talk about that in a moment. And sensation that move between people, that move between bodies, that constitute environments. And affect really actually resists clear articulation and operates in the background, kind of in this shifty way. It's shaping behavior and relationships in ways that we may not immediately recognize. So this is where your sensitivity as a reader is going to come in and develop and become this muscle. It's, you're not just blundering through a sentence and moving along, you're really stopping to look and feel, right? I kind of think of it as like touching the fabric, right? What does that fabric feel like, right? Is it rough cotton or is it wool? You're really stopping to engage with a sentence in that way. So Kathleen Stewart is, she is a prominent scholar in affect theory and cultural anthropology. And this book that she wrote, her work really offers insights into the nuances of everyday experience and just the affective dimensions of everyday life, really mundane stuff. But I love her. I love her so much. She really does a great job of talking about the ways that affect, like the subtle ways that affect shape our interactions with the world. So I have started to apply her theories to my enjoyment of reading literature. And And we can explore how that affective experiences of reading is shaped by the interplay of emotions, sensations, and immersive qualities of narrative. So, why does a book move me? Intensity and atmosphere. Right. I'll go, so we're almost at an hour. Narrative can create a palpable atmosphere, right? We understand what that feels, right? Like there's a mood of a book, right? Some books have a mood ring that feels very light and airy and funny, right? And others, like Dostoevsky, right? Like intense, like almost damp or cold, or they feel a certain way, right? What does that feel like to you, right? If you're like, we're in the age of mood boards, right? Like, what type of mood board does one book have versus another? Sensory engagement. The sensory aspects of affect highlight how reading engages multiple senses, right? The texture of language, the sonority of language, the visual imagery, even the physical sensation of holding a book, right, with a pen in hand, contribute to the overall affective experience. Emotional resonance and attunement. So affect involves a kind of attunement to the world. So what does this mean to you, right? Like developing an attunement to the world, right? This feels like it's relevant to reading practice, and it's also relevant to other things probably in your life. I just think that's such a beautiful thing when we're thinking about meaning, right? What does it mean for you to be attuned to the world? As you're reading, developing a sensitivity to the emotional currents that flow through everyday life, right? Are you feeling things throughout the day? Or do you not feel things, right? And what does that feel like? And in literature, it really translates to the reader's emotional resonance with the characters and events in a story. The ordinary and the extraordinary. I actually don't always enjoy magical realism. Some of my favorite books include it. Toni Morrison actually writes with magical realism, but she does so in such a way that it almost seems normal or real. But I don't enjoy magical realism because I feel the ordinary is already so magical. I'm really interested in just the ways that everyday life like is extraordinary. I'm less interested in the ways that like magic or fantasy can sort of like augment it. And I think literature's ability to really illuminate the profound in the mundane really resonates with Stewart's interest in the affective dimensions of everyday life. And then lastly, temporal flow and rhythm. Stewart's work on like temporal aspects of affect, so how time is experienced and felt, can really be experienced like when you're thinking about pacing and the rhythm of a narrative. The affective dimensions of reading, like they can just create a deeply immersive and embodied experience where the ordinary moments in a story, right, those sort of interstitial moments, the moments when a character is maybe doing something that doesn't seem very important, can become charged. And so as you're developing your sensitivity, think about these like when does a moment feel charged, right? With significance or emotional depth, and why, right? If you think about charge or currents, right? There's currents, there's energies going on through a story. What does that look like? And feel like, what does that feel like? So this is from Kathleen Stewart. We won't read the whole thing, but it's so beautiful, I think. And I think I wanted to hopefully enhance your sensitivity and your understanding of aesthetic pleasure, aesthetic enjoyment of books. So here where you see the tendons of a scene, I have it underlined. Isn't that lovely? The tendons of a scene, right? We've talked about scaffolding and architecture. the elements of an actual field forming up, right? What is it for something to form up, right? So I don't know, if you think about like love, right? You're reading a love story, right? There's a momentum, there's a charge there, right? How is that building? Where are you seeing the moments that aren't necessarily being told explicitly? Like, where are you seeing those emotions like love build up? I love this. It matters if something is red or yellow, or if a leaf turns the atmosphere from summer to fall in a minute when the wind blows. Right. So that's affect. And what does that feel like? That's atmosphere, right? That feeling, right? When it's suddenly
Right.
autumn and you're noticing it for the first time. Throwing together, right? Whatever's throwing together. And that's kind of life. You step outside on the street and there's people coming and going, and the world has sort of thrown itself together in front of you. And what's next, right? What does that feel like? What's happening? What's the charge? And the last sentence down below, writing and reading are a way to get into what's going on and staying there long enough to begin to think about living now. So yeah, her work is really important to me. And I want to just press on this just for a moment longer. I want to read these two passages that are from her book, Ordinary Affects. A man parks his truck at the roadside and takes out a picnic cooler, a folding chair, a book. He sits in the shade of the mesquite and waits. A car passes, its occupants glancing out the window. A narrative flickers in and out of focus. So I love this. It's kind of this felt quality of the scene, right? The stillness, the anticipation, this charged but unspoken atmosphere, right, of waiting. And there's this space too for the reader to sense the emotional resonances rather than explaining or resolving them, right? It's this moment where you watch someone pass by and this is maybe the only minute that you will ever see them in your life, right? They came and they're gone, and they had this life before and this life after. And there you are witnessing it just for a moment. And then the second one, the waitress moves through the diner. Her tray balanced on one hand, her body leaning into the rhythm of the room. She takes orders, refills coffee, catches the corner of a table with her hip. Something about her pulls at the edges of attention, a small drama of exhaustion, competence, and something harder to name. I love this passage. It's like there's this palpable sensation in this room. It's an atmosphere shaped by her movement, gestures, right? You can almost see the woman's face, right? There's this unspoken emotional undercurrent. And Stewart avoids naming things directly. They're very vague and they feel very almost unfinished. But it's kind of what she's getting at is these ineffable qualities that linger in ordinary moments. And I think that they're a great exercise for thinking about what atmospheres feel like. Coming back to Iser, there's a dynamic interaction between text and reader, leading to a constant modification of the reader's response. Okay, and in grad school, there was a word for this that we used all the time, this dynamic interaction. Maybe some of you are familiar with it. Intersubjectivity. Intersubjectivity is the ways that we are constituted by what is in front of us, right? The ways that in a relationship, one person constitutes the other person and vice versa, right? We don't live in a vacuum. We're in relationship with other things and people. So just some questions for you to think about. Your resources, right? Your influences. We talked a little bit about this. What is your intellectual autobiography? And when you think about your source material, what are the books that maybe you give away or you donate, and what are the books that you keep on your shelf because you want to keep them with you, right? Arguably, that's your source material. And if you can't remember, you remember loving the book, but you don't really remember what it was about or what moved you, this might be a good opportunity to go back through and articulate that to yourself. Okay, moving along. What is meaning? Right, we talk about that, oh, it's so meaningful. But what does it actually mean? Like, what is meaning? In grad school, my advisor and one of my favorite teachers, he was an anthropologist. He was a existential phenomenological anthropologist. And his name was Michael Jackson. And he was a elderly man from New Zealand, but he did share the name with Michael Jackson. He really explored this concept of meaning in human life through his ethnographic work and philosophical reflections. So I have really thought about like, what is meaning and how do we acquire it? And one of Michael Jackson's like most significant contributions in anthropology was the idea that meaning is not something that is statically embedded in cultural artifacts or in rituals, but through lived experiences and social interactions, right? So this is again like the work, the verb, the co-constitution, that process, that ongoing process. He has a book called The Politics of Storytelling. And he argues that meaning emerges through the process of storytelling and narrative construction, right? So if you were to finish the sentence, I am somebody who, or even further, I'm somebody who likes to read blank kind of books, right? How would you answer that question? And what would be the history behind that? And, as we know, sharing stories allows us to make sense of experiences, connect with others, negotiate identities, right? So we're seeing a pattern here. This should be now like, we should be kind of seeing the way that these theorists are talking about meaning and what it means to come to a text. But I love what he says. So in his book, Michael Jackson says, meaning is not something one discovers, right? So when I was reading Virginia Woolf and I was kind of waiting, like, where are these big moments I want to underline? Or we see that on Instagram too, like the big moments that like we underline and then take photos of and share. Meaning is not something one discovers, it is something one does. It is an activity rather than a state, right? So then what does it mean to have a meaningful reading practice? What does that look like to you? Okay. There's an active and dynamic nature to meaning making. And here we all know the quote from Joan Didion, we tell ourselves stories in order to live. Stories help us create coherence. They help us develop a sense of order in our lives. There's interpretation and selection, right? So we are prioritizing what's meaningful and we kind of filtering out what's irrelevant or less significant to us. There's always moral and social lessons. There's existential commitments and significance. And shared understanding, right? Like shared understanding and communal meaning. When stories are told and retold within a community, they become a part of a collective narrative, right? And again, intertextuality, right? So here we are again. And I think often when we read, we're not noticing references. And this is challenging, like it's an ongoing process to have the sort of cultural, or to have like the Rolodex of themes and motifs and to be able to put them in conversation with each other. And, you know, the worst case scenario is that we're reading the book without that awareness, right? Which a lot of us do, which most of us do. But it is kind of like, it's kind of like this aha factor when you read a book and you find the reference. There's a certain delight that comes from recognizing a familiar component from an earlier experience. And so, you know, just remembering we're co-creating our past reading experiences, literary influences, and the present moment, I think, as well as like future possibility, are all kind of working together to create this meaning. And again, aesthetic pleasure. So here we go. The Odyssey and Ulysses, Blake and Rimbaud and Patti Smith, The Wasteland and Greek mythology, Bob Dylan, his songs have so many references. He's the Bible, mythology, as well as folk singers like Guthrie and Seeger. Jane Eyre and Wide Sargasso Sea is a really lovely, lovely one. And then, of course, Bridget Jones' Diary. Okay, so developing a lens. Narrative consciousness, which is also known as point of view. So what I want you to start to think about is when you read, I would like you to think about having this like telescope lens. And sometimes the narrator has zoomed way out and we're kind of thinking about it is a truth universally acknowledged that a woman in want of a good fortune or a man in possession of a good fortune is in want of a wife or something like that, right? It's a truth universally acknowledged. And then other times the novel starts like, I went to the store, right? And we're with that person, the lens has zoomed way in. We're right in that person's experience as though we were embodied in their own body. So I hope that you guys are all familiar with first person, right? Second person. But I think it's really important to think about, and I want you to always be aware of that lens, because even though a story might start, I'm on my way to the store. That novel may not always be written in first person, and there might be moments where it shifts. Perhaps it shifts to objective, perhaps even second person, right? Maybe even the narrator saying, for example, let me think, I'm on my way to the store. You wouldn't believe what happened to me yesterday, right? So suddenly there's that shift in consciousness. And what, like, if you think about it and you kind of engage it, like, what does that tell you? Like, there's kind of, let's think about it. Like, you know, what does that feel like if someone said, you wouldn't believe what happened to me yesterday, right? Like, there's kind of this like familiarity, there's this familiar tone, there's this kind of gossip or like wanting to like bring you in and close, right? So start thinking about these things. Again, the sensitivity of a reader. So thinking about the way that this lens is shifting. We'll revisit this, okay? Yeah, where are the words coming from? Who's saying this, right? I think that I can't remember if I have examples, but we talked about this so much in the Jane Austen course because we were really, I was really like impressing on the members, the participants to really understand like indirect free speech, which is when, of course, you know that when a narrator is speaking, the quote is often in quotation marks, right? Unless it's like a Sally Rooney novel or something. But traditionally, text from a character is in quotation marks. And in indirect free speech, there's words that sort of slip in that the narrator says that feel like they're coming from the character itself themselves. So we'll see. I can't recall if I have a little bit more about this in my notes or not, so we can revisit it, or type it into the chat if you have specific questions or something. But I love what Paul Auster says. He says the third person narrative voice in the traditional novel is a strange device, right? We're used to it now. We accept it. We don't question it anymore. But when you stop and think about it, there's an eerie, disembodied quality to that voice. It seems to come from nowhere. And it's sort of true. And so who is this? Like, who is this narrator? Where are these words coming from? What does that feel like? What do you think there? Does this narrator have an MO? Are they reliable or unreliable? Do you trust them? If you aren't familiar with unreliable narrator, you can Google that later. It's an interesting concept. And so being critical of narrative consciousness is an important, I think, faculty, right? Determine who is telling the story and from what vantage point, right? So first person, or are they, are they a character within the story, or are they an observer outside of the story? Consider reliability. Do they have biases? Do they have motivations? How might their perspective shape the narrative and influence your interpretation of events? And when you analyze voice and tone, how do these elements reflect any personality, attitude, worldview, right? Remember the smirk in Pride and Prejudice. And I think too, like, put yourself in the shoes of the characters to understand their experience, their thoughts and emotions. Like, how does their point of view shape their perceptions of the world, right? How does Lizzie Bennet, as a young eligible woman to be married, like, how does that shape her perception of the world versus Mr. Darcy? Question assumptions. You can like be skeptical of the narrator, and be open to alternative interpretations. And lastly, reflect on authorial choices. So why did the author choose a particular point of view and how it serves the narrative purpose? I think it's interesting. I think a lot of times as authors are getting started, right, they write 20 pages in the first person, and then they say, no, this has to be third person. Okay, so then they rewrite another 20 pages. And maybe they continue, or maybe they say, oh, no, we need to go back and this needs to be first person. So there's reasons. There's a lot of choice that goes into that, that can be really important. Okay, developing taste. What is good taste? Harold Bloom would say works that have stood the test of time, culturally and artistically significant, right? What does that mean? Literary excellence. I think he thinks that the great authors, like the Odyssey, Shakespeare, they really set a high standard for literary excellence. And that's what Harold Bloom is really like sharing and talking about. So, am I literary? We saw at the beginning that C.S. Lewis offers a distinctive approach to evaluating literature by focusing on the reader's experience rather than the intrinsic qualities of the work itself, right? So he's distinguishing, I mentioned the unliterary reader versus the literary reader. And according to Lewis, the non-literary reader approaches texts more superficially, often seeking mere entertainment or escape, right? There's nothing wrong with that, of course, but there is more available to you should you want to engage. Reading for transformation. The best reading experiences are transformative. And experiential criteria for judgment. So rather than judging a book by its adherence to specific literary standards, Lewis is really talking about the value of a book that can be measured by the quality of the reading experience it provides. So I mentioned that Harold Bloom is problematic. I encourage you to look at his books, read about his perspective, and sort of think about the ways that he's helpful to this conversation and the ways that he might be harmful as well. I think that things about aesthetic refinement, intellectual growth, cultural enrichment, personal development, so textual sort of we are a little bit cheeky and irreverent at times. And, but I think that really what it comes down to, right, is it's like being a person who's read Anna Karenina so that you can meet other people in the world who have had the amazing aesthetic experience, the aesthetic pleasure of reading Anna Karenina, and the connections that you can make, the way that your reading practice grows in conversation with someone else who's read the same work. I think that's the purpose. Susan Sontag has an essay called Notes on Camp, and here she explores the ideas of taste through the lens of aesthetic sensibility on camp. And one notable quote from this is, taste has no system and no proofs. So she really believes taste is subjective and cannot be reduced to a set of rules or objective criteria. So what you love and appreciate, no one else is required to love and appreciate that either, or as well. There's complexity and variability of taste, and it's shaped by personal and cultural influences and not fixed standards. So when we're sort of talking about this like aesthetic refinement, judgment, right? Critical. Part of being a good reader is being very critical and again, discerning what is and is not worth your time. And I think ways to do this that feel like accepting of everyone and kind of being, I think, a part of the cultural conversation today, as opposed to like in the ivory tower that perhaps Harold Bloom is operating from. Really understanding subjectivity of taste, which we just highlighted with Susan Sontag, the cultural and contextual influences that a person might have. There's irony and playfulness, especially in camp, which I think is a great approach to art and culture. Rejection of elitism. And there's this dynamic and evolving nature of taste. Sontag speaks about the ways that taste develops and changes over time. I'm sure that you guys know what that's like. Context change, and so do standards and preferences. So something you may not liked in the past, you may be more open to now. I think too that speaks to like when I didn't enjoy Patti Smith's music and the ways that a book, her memoir, provided an access point for me to then enjoy it. Okay, so let's kind of get into the crux now of this work. You guys have really stood with me. I appreciate that through some of this heavier theory. And I think just bringing in, I just want to reiterate that you can have a meaningful reading practice. I believe you can be a good reader, whatever that means, a committed reader, a deep reader, without having read Barthes or like the philosophy or the anthropology behind some of these ideas. But I think that knowing that your practice is a part of a conversation that people have been having and been thinking about what is literature and why do we read it and why do we love it and why is it meaningful, right? I think that this can be having this foundation, I'm hoping can kind of set you up to know that you are in a lineage of people who, like buy books they can't afford, or like travel with, you know, like go on vacation and bring a dozen books with them, or like these ways that we like that I think people who love books just really love books. And why? Like, what does it mean to be someone who loves books? Like, why? Um, Again, intellectual autobiography. So I don't know. Do we want to take a quick break, like a 5-minute break, and get some water, use the restroom? Yes, Jane is nodding her head. Okay, why don't we come back at 2:26? Okay, so I'll see you back here then.
Okay. Uh, Hey, sweetie. Okay.
Okay. So we'll start back up again. So I hope you guys are still with me. Sort of the work that we've been doing now, hopefully will kind of I'll come to fruition, and you'll be able to kind of see the ways that we're gonna look at some passages with the tools that we've acquired, and sit with things in a way that hopefully feel a little bit more meaningful, right? So we've talked about intersubjectivity, reader response theory, the lens, the way that it zooms in and out, affect theory, point of view, and like first person, second person, free and direct speech. Okay, so let's see what comes up. Oops. Okay. Cormac McCarthy. Any Cormac McCarthy fans? Okay, so let's start. I'm going to read this. Once there were brook trouts in the streams in the mountains, right? So I have like underlined this and put the star, and this is how I would do it when I'm reading with a pen. I'm sort of underlining. I'm especially looking at the first sentence, the first word, what's going on. I'm getting oriented. I'm kind of dipping my toe in. So here we're starting once, right? Like there's this broad once upon a time, right? Once in time, there were brook trouts in the streams, in the mountains. So we're sort of spanned out. We're in the mountains, we're in the forest, we're thinking about streams generally, right? Not specific. So you can see the way that they were placed in time by this first sentence. And then we have the you, right? So we're in the second person. You could see them standing in the amber current where the white edges of their fins wimpled softly in the flow. So if you are a Cormac McCarthy fan, you'll see the way wimpled, I think, is just feels so McCarthyan. He writes in a very distinctive style, and he would be one to describe fish's fins as wimpled. So that's part of the beauty too, is being able to see. It's kind of like slipping on an old shoe or an old glove, or seeing an old friend, where it sort of is distinctive and recognizable. And I find Cormac McCarthy's language to be that. It's very distinctive, right? So we have once, we have this you. He's speaking to us in this particular moment, and then he is bringing us into this beautiful amber current, the wimpled fins softly in the flow. They smelled of moss in your hand. I absolutely love this sentence, because you know what that smells like. And in this third sentence, we're brought from this once upon a time, we're in the mountains, we're in the streams, and now you're suddenly intimate, smelling your hands and smelling moss. And I feel like this, for me, is aesthetic pleasure. To me, it's brilliant and beautiful. And I love Cormac McCarthy for doing this again and again and again in his prose. Polished and muscular and torsional. Right, torsional. That's very McCarthy. On their backs were vermiculite patterns. Vermiculite patterns that were maps of the world in its becoming, right? So we're talking more about meaning. What does this mean? What is the world in its becoming? Maps and mazes of a thing that could not be put back, right? So as you're reading that, you perhaps have no idea what he's talking about, of a thing that could not be put back, right? But I'm sure in your own lives you have experiences that, cannot be changed or fixed, or, you can't go back in time to do otherwise, right? So that might resonate with you there. Not be made right again. In the deep glens where they lived, all things were older than man, and they hummed of mystery. So again, think about this lens, right? We're zoomed way out. We zoom in into the hand, our nose in the hand, and our body too as we smell. and then were zoomed back out, older than man, and hummed of mystery. So you can see the way that, like, if this were a film, the way that the videography would sort of paint this scene. And then also, as far as affect, this feels a certain way. It's talking about on the backs of the fish were patterns that mirror the maps of like the world and its becoming. It's really a beautiful moment. Okay, let's move on. Unless someone has something to say, please unmute yourself and jump in if you have anything to say. Okay. Amy Hempel, my favorite writer. Sarah had mentioned that Kathy Acker had really shown her what a novel could be, or a story could be, a book could be. And for me, Amy Hempel really showed me what a short story can be. Her most recent book out, I forget what it's called, but there's a short story and it's almost written like a poem. And it was published in the New Yorker, I believe as a short story, but maybe as a poem. And it's just incredible. It's incredible. Anyway, if you want to talk about Amy Hempel, I'm happy to do so. So let's read this passage. The year I began to say vase instead of vase, a man I barely knew nearly accidentally killed me. The man was not hurt when the other car hit ours. The man I had known for 1 week held me in the street in a way that meant I couldn't see my legs. I remember knowing that I shouldn't look and knowing that I would look if it wasn't that I couldn't. My blood was on the front of this man's clothes. He said, "You'll be okay, but this sweater is ruined." I screamed from the fear of the pain, but I did not feel any pain. In the hospital after injections, I knew there was pain in the room. I just didn't know whose pain it was. What happened to one of my legs required 400 stitches, which, when I told it, became 500 stitches because nothing is ever quite bad as it could be. So the voice here, no one writes like Amy Hempel, I don't think. She's distinctive, and the way she formulates sentences and the way she has her repetition and rhythm feels very unique to her, and I really I love what she does with words. So the voice is incredibly strong. Right, the year I began to say vase instead of vase, a man I barely knew nearly accidentally killed me. Right, there's infinite number of ways you could say that per sentence, and she chose this formulation of words. There is some irreverence here, and there is some cheekiness here, right? You'll be okay, but the sweater is ruined, right? That's not what you're picturing on the side of the road when someone's bleeding out, I guess. And she's confiding in us, the reader, right? She's intimate with us. She's sharing, like, this is a conversational tone in some ways. I mean, it's very literary in the sense that you wouldn't speak like this to a friend, but in a literary way, she is conversing to us quite casually, I think. Let's go to the sentence here. The man was not hurt when the car hit ours. And then the second sentence, the man I had known for 1 week. So as I read that, right, as I read the whole passage, you probably saw that detail, right? The man I had known for 1 week. But what does that tell us? Like, what is that doing? That little bit of information. When I read it, did it like pique your interest? Did you want to know more? Or did you not even notice it? I think that when you have your pen and you're reading, you're going to circle that, and you're going to make a mark so that you can think about that. Does she talk about it later, or is it just something she mentions? I think that's a good example of like writers put information in almost in a way you don't notice, right? And so we want to be expert noticers. Um, and again, notice the temporality of this passage. So she starts with specificity in time, the year I began to say vase, right? Instead of vase. An interesting way of like demarcating time. And then again, it ends with this grand universal statement, right? Nothing is ever quite as bad as it could be. And that's another moment for meaning because you're like, yeah, you're right. Yeah. Like, right. You might resonate with that. It sort of feels like allegorical or sort of like there's wisdom there, and you might disagree with it. But again, there's the specificity, vase instead of vase, and ending with a universal statement. So if you think about the structure, again, the scaffolding or the architecture of this paragraph, there's an artistry behind it that makes it, I think, an aesthetic experience, even if it's just one passage taken out of context of the larger story. And you're starting to see kind of the ways that like you could just read this paragraph and kind of be moving along, but if you kind of sit with it, you're starting to see more things going on. What about the repetition here? The man, the man, the man. Pain, any pain, was pain, whose pain, right? Are you noticing that, right? How does it feel if you're going to read it in your head? And how is it going to feel if you're going to read it out loud? Actually, one thing I wanted to bring to your attention on this point, going back to Cormac McCarthy, is I wanted to encourage you. So in this second sentence, the amber current where the white edges of their fins wimpled softly in the flow. What I'd like you to do is just take 10 seconds, and silently, so you're not actually speaking, but I want you to say white edges of their fins wimpled softly in the flow. And so you're feeling the way that those words sit and sort of flit off of your mouth, your tongue, your teeth. Wimpled softly in the flow. There's a delicacy of sounds, right? There's again sonority to that sentence. There's a way that it feels on the mouth. This, I think, is intentional. Don DeLillo, I recall him saying the way that I don't exactly remember exactly what he said, but he spoke about the ways that his writing perhaps like either uses a lot of R's, like he's really trying to or the opposite, like he's not doing that. I don't recall which one, but I remember reading that and finding it remarkable that he is crafting sentences based on how they sound, and in the larger context of his work, he knows that he's not using a certain consonant because aesthetically he's making that choice not to. I just found that to be really remarkable. And I feel like writers who are putting that amount of work into their prose deserve feel more deserving of my attention and an attempt to read their work. Okay. The last thing I'll say about this passage too is there is something about this narrator that feels a little bit unreliable, right? She tells us that what happened to one of her legs required 400 stitches, which when she told it became 500 stitches. So, but when she told it like when she's telling it now, or when she's telling it in the past to someone else? Is she going to be truthful with us? Here she's confiding in us, right? She's building our trust because she's telling us a secret. But is she worthy of our trust? Okay. And then Don DeLillo The Body Artist. This is another one of my favorite books. The audiobook is narrated by Laurie Anderson, and it's a really great, beautiful, beautiful audiobook experience. Okay, time seemed to pass. Sorry, time seems to pass. The world happens, unrolling into moments, and you stop to glance at a spider pressed to its web. There is a quickness of light and a sense of things outlined precisely, and streaks of running luster on the bay. You know more surely who you are on a strong, bright day after a storm, when the smallest falling leaf is stabbed with self-awareness. The wind makes a sound in the pines, and the world comes into being irreversibly, and the spider rides the wind-swayed web. So, aesthetic experience. I find that passage to be beautiful. Time seems to pass. For whom? To whom, right? Again, like, be asking these questions. Be curious. Is this in second person yet? Or not yet? Or is it more omniscient? It maybe feels more omniscient to me. Does it feel omniscient to you? You see the way that affect is here, right? A sense of things outlined precisely. That's, I feel like Kathleen Stewart could have written that, but it's also a juxtaposition, right? There's this sense of things, which is very vague. What is he describing? A sense of things outlined precisely. And again, word choice. Smallest falling leaf is stabbed with self-awareness, right? So what does that mean? You don't know what it means. So what does it feel like? And do you like it? Or do you like, what is he talking about? Like, let's go back to Jane Austen and talk about Lizzie Bennet and Mr. Darcy, right? Like, do you like it or not? And that's okay. In this kind of case, I see it as he's sort of zooming in. The world happens unrolling into moments. Maybe he starts big. Time seems to pass, and then he goes into moments, and there's a spider pressed to its web. Right? And again, we're beginning with time, and we're ending with time. The world comes into being. So there's kind of this closed circuit to this paragraph, which is really beautiful. And the spider rides the wind-swayed web. I find it to just be gorgeous. Are there any questions to this extent in this kind of section of literary alchemy for any of these three passages? Is this helpful or sort of unhelpful? Do you sort of see how I'm engaging with these passages, the way that I'm using like annotations to kind of think through the way that I'm looking for information by asking questions, as opposed to assuming that the narrative is going to continue on and I will get more information, or sort of like, yeah, there's sort of like a reading and a going back. It's kind of like you read and loop, you read and loop, you read and loop. And of course, like, my relationship to rereading is that I think rereading is an incredible practice that like enhances a reading experience so much. And also I'm just like so busy that I don't really reread. But the books that I have reread have just affected me much differently. So rereading is an incredible practice, and perhaps it's one that you can integrate into your life. In which case, perhaps the first time you read, you do just read it. Like, not everyone wants to read in loops and reread and look at paragraphs in this way. And you don't always have to, but I would encourage you to maybe at least just do this with the first page and really orient yourself and say, okay, who is talking and who is this narrator and what are they saying and what information am I being given right away and where might this show up later? You know, and then you can fall into the story. And of course, if you are making notes on the page, then when you finish the book, you can go back and you can see the notes that you wrote to yourself. I guarantee you probably won't remember writing those notes. And so they can be a great sort of like signpost for the meaning that you're going to continue to do. So I've mentioned this idea of source material. This has kind of become my working document for how I kind of quickly try and extract the main points of a book in a way that really help me recall what is going on and why, and like thinking about, you know, so if you were to say to me, you know, I really loved the book Beautiful and Damned by F. Scott Fitzgerald. I really loved that book. And you say, oh, you love, what did you love about it? Like, tell me about it. Well, I don't remember. There's a man and a woman. I don't remember their names. They love each other and then they're fighting and then, you know, but this template that I'm, you know, I feel like this is still a working document in my process, but this kind of helps me to finish a book and say, okay, what is the general premise? If I can sum this up in one sentence, how am I going to do so? You know, no looking at Google or Goodreads or anything, like really try and do this from your perspective, right? Because your general premise might be different from mine. And what we're looking for is your specific general premise. And then character study. So who is the main character or who feels like the most important character to you? And what do you want to say about them? Did you like them, right? Character study for the Amy Hempel story, right? A nameless female narrator, conversational, intimate, but can I trust her, right? And then a poignant passage, I think like the Cormac McCarthy passage, like that feels, there are words there that feel like emblematic of the story at large. What's a passage that you underlined and really loved? What's the passage you sort of want to always keep with you and kind of remember when you think about their writing? And then special affects, right? What's the atmosphere? What's a charge? What's something that was subtle but felt significant? It's kind of like vibes, you know, it's like, you know, when you walk into a room and someone's just been talking about you, like that feels like something, right? And so what are those feelings that you're sensing from the story itself? And then lastly, source material number 5. This is sort of where I write, like, what is my takeaway? Like, what is the thing that I want to say? Oh my gosh, I loved, I see you're reading The Beautiful and Damned. I love that book too. It was so important for me because of, you know, X, Y, or Z. It's really that thing that you want to remember that's fresh in your mind and you want to make sure that you're not forgetting. So I found this on Reddit. It was really funny to me. You know, this person is asking, do you write in books or not? Why? And it's funny, right? I was raised, like my parents raised me and told me that you literally do not ever write in a book. And I love what this person said. Books are supposed to be lived in. They're a goddamn time capsule and vehicle into the minds and souls that came before you. And sometimes that person is the old you. They're not a leave no trace wilderness. Okay, so I really love that. And thinking through this source material then of the road, I think the passage from Cormac McCarthy was actually the last paragraph. The passage that we just looked at was the last paragraph. of the novel, and here's the first. So When He Woke in the Woods. So, for general premise of The Road, I would say like it's a post-apocalyptic, odyssey. Um, I might talk about the negotiation between hope and despair. I'm really looking for kind of like big themes, something that's just going to kind of jar my memory. Um, I have like little sheets that I write them on, and I just kind of keep them on my desk. And it's kind of a nice archive, but it's, or you can slip them into the book itself and keep them on your shelf. And they can just sort of like be great tools. But for general premise, I would kind of talk too about like maybe perhaps say something about the fragility of existence, and desolation, or confronting what it means to survive, right, in a world in which like everything else has crumbled. Character study, right? So father and son, but really what it's about is it's about a father who has this fierce, unspoken devotion to his son, right? And there's a distinction there that I would want to highlight on my source material page. It's really like this resilience and constant vigilance, that really reveal like this weight of love that he has, right? So this is the type of things that I would put in this character study. There's kind of this guarded tenderness that this father has, and those are themes that I think are really beautiful and poignant and make up The Road, how the story is what it is. Then third, for poignant passage, there's this passage I love. There is no God and we are his prophets. So dystopian novel, apocalyptic, there is no God and we are his prophets. So I would write that on my sheet, my source material sheet, just because it's really like it's emblematic of a world in which meaning, the traditional anchors of meaning have vanished, right? The special affects, I think, in this book are that McCarthy's writing is spare. It's like almost hymnal prose, right? So if you write that as a note for yourself, I think that would be a lovely thing to come back to, right? Hymnal prose. How can you do, like, what adjectives can you use in your efforts to kind of like memorialize your reading practice to yourself? There's like horror and really incredible beauty in this novel, right? And what's their relationship together? What does that feel like to have horror so close to beauty? And of course, too, like there is this gray wasteland, and so that feels like something, especially when they're juxtaposed with like these really lovely moments of care. And so the key takeaway for me from The Road is that it's really a meditation on human connection, in its most elemental form. So even when like the entire world has been stripped away, right, there's still this bond between two people, who love each other, and that still feels like hope, right? So you can see that I didn't say necessarily The Road is a story of there's this dad and he has a boy, and like you don't really know what happens. I'm really going deep into the themes and what it feels like, what's interesting to me, and why, like the things that might be meaningful, right? A summary of the novel's plot isn't really what's meaningful. What's meaningful to me is that it's a lesson on human connection and what it means to love fiercely. And so, let's see, 5 more minutes. We're doing perfectly. Okay. Harold Bloom again. Here he is in his library. I urge you to find what truly comes near to you. That can be used for weighing and considering. Read deeply, not to believe, not to accept, not to contradict, but to learn to share in that one nature that reads, that writes and reads, right? This one nature. You are people who love books and love literature and love the word. And that is a spark, that's a drive, that's an aesthetic appreciation, and that's a creative practice. And you know, you are making good on it now. And I encourage you to continue to make good on that in your reading practices going forward. Another one from him. Yet the strongest, most authentic motive for deep reading of the now much abused traditional canon is the search for a difficult pleasure, right? So there are all sorts of books out there, some better than others, and we know that that's a subjective distinction. Sometimes we might enjoy reading a great book on the beach or on an airplane, but I think all of us too love works that perhaps have more depth, and reading and rereading and questioning and interrogating and looking for the lens and asking who is the narrator, right? That's all this difficult pleasure, or sort of the difficult work for aesthetic pleasure. Again, a difficult pleasure. Even that concept brings me immense joy. Okay, some of these I touched on. We read a little bit of Don DeLillo. Some of you perhaps are intrigued, and others are saying, no way. It's actually a beautiful story. There is a plot, and it's interesting. It's really compelling. So I recommend it. It's very small. You can read this. It's really a novella. You could read it in one day. Housekeeping is also just an incredibly subtle, again, a beautiful plot, but subtle, effective. The environment, like the landscape that she's talking about, or just even the atmosphere of like where the characters live and everything. Fingerbone, I think, is the town that the girls live in. Fingerbone, a beautiful novel, one of my favorites. And then Bluets by Maggie Nelson. This is like a cult classic, even though it's not even really that old, but it's just an incredible. Yeah, I haven't met a person who hasn't just said, "Oh my God, Bluets is amazing." This is written in fragments, and so if you read it, pay attention to this, to again, like what's happening in between the fragments, like in the white space. What work is the white space doing? How would, what do you think Maggie Nelson is trying to do when she ends one sentence? Like enter, 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 like make space on her word processor, and then like starts another sentence in a new paragraph. Like what's the bridge, right? And just a couple more. Here's Just Kids, Department of Speculation by Jenny Offel. This one is wonderful, also written in fragments. This, to my mind, is the book that kind of put the concept of art monster into the cultural conversation that's been around. I've been seeing it a lot. There's been at least one book written titled Art Monster. This idea of women and mothers who really want to commit to a creative practice, and who kind of like are willing to kind of sacrifice family and sort of maternal roles and able to do that. So it's I think it's an important book to read. It's really, I loved that book. And then Tropic of Cancer, to throw kind of more of a classic one in here. I adore Henry Miller's writing. He's very masculine. He's rough, rugged, similar to McCarthy, but different. And I just find this book to be a really like a roller coaster, in the sense that you get on, and he is like, there is such momentum to his prose. It's like it rolls. It's like this rolling stone that like just kind of is going down the hill, and you're like, yeah, you'll see. And okay, so that's it, the end. If you want to share anything in the comments, please feel free, or if you want to unmute and have any last words, or if you want to just follow up by email, please do. But otherwise, I hope this was helpful to you guys, and I hope it was meaningful, and I hope it's just sort of like the beginning to putting some of these things into practice for you. So yeah, thank you guys so much for your time and have a wonderful rest of your Saturday.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
You're
Bye-bye.
welcome. Bye. Thank you.
Oh, whoops.